With less than a week until pitchers and catchers report to spring training, we're talking Royals offseason with Jack Johnson of the Locked On Royals podcast, grading the offseason moves thus far, what else might be in the pipeline, and then discussing a 2025 possible division championship.
Hey, what's good, y'all? It's your boy JD6 here. I'm with my man. Shout out to KC Sports Authority. Make sure y'all go check that podcast out, man.
You heard the man. And welcome back into another episode of the KC Sports Authority podcast. If you're checking us out over here on our YouTube page, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button below. Hit us up with that thumbs up so more fans like yourself can find the show. You can also hit us up on any of our social medias at KCSA Pod. And you can also listen on the go on Spotify, where you can rate and review the podcast. Give us 5 stars. We would appreciate that. Well, we got 3 baseball nuts on the show today because, fellas, even though it's still winter, like I said, less than a week until pitchers and catchers report to spring training. We've got a flurry of offseason talk to get into. So if you are a baseball nut like us and you haven't done so yet, make sure you also go check out this other episode I did where we sat down with the head skipper of your Kansas baseball team, Dan Fitzgerald, to preview the upcoming season. Talk about a baseball nut. You could go all day with great stories from him. Great episode. Go check that one out if you haven't done so yet. Well, Jack, we always appreciate you coming on. You know, you're the resident Kansas City baseball in the loop guy. So first off, thanks for coming back on. And how excited are you that baseball is it's in the air? It's not quite, you can't see it yet, but you can kind of start to smell the pine tar coming off of the grass.
Oh, it's the best, man. I know we were talking a little bit before this interview of it's like the best time of the year. I'm a big college basketball fan as well. How can you not love March Madness? But you know, with Kansas City with the Chiefs in the Super Bowl, and then we're going to have pitchers and catchers reporting. It's the greatest time. And I also love springtime weather. So, you know, you have like this feeling of just true excitement with everything that's going on. And it's different now compared to years past. Like last year, there was that excitement because of what they'd done in the offseason. Now there's expectation. Now people are going into the year thinking this is a good baseball team. We should expect good baseball. And that's something you haven't had since 2017, going into that season, coming off even another year where they missed the postseason. But still, you had the core together. They made some moves. This go around, they're trying to build off a very impressive 86-win season, and I can't wait for it.
Yeah, and this is, I think, the first time I can think in quite a while that maybe PECOTA projections are relatively favorable for the fan perspective. It hasn't been this, I think it's probably been, got to be 10, 11 years that they've had north of 80 win projections from a PECOTA preseason projection. So yeah, a lot of excitement heading into the year. Just as a Kansas City sports fan, you know, this is a great time when the Chiefs are doing what they're doing year in and year out. It's great. But when you've got the other teams around KC, in that same time frame, you know, obviously Bobby Witt and Patrick Mahomes eras overlapping. It's just a great time to be a Kansas City fan. But yes, when it is great as this, that does mean expectations are coming. And we definitely have some big expectations for this upcoming season, as the Royals did finally make the playoffs for the first time in quite a while. And they're looking to do that and go even further this year. So I want to get with you on the off season, not quite as splashy, you know, quantity moves as last year per se. But obviously, the offseason really gets kicked off with the big question mark was Brady Singer going to be the biggest trade piece? Were we going to keep him? What was the thought there? Obviously, the move was made, trading him for Jonathan India and Joey Weimer with the Reds, solved a bunch of problems while possibly creating some other ones to say. But Jonathan India was a guy that was on the Royals target list for quite a while. JJ's even talked about going back to his early days in the minors, being a guy that they really liked his toolkit, a guy that's going to come in and should be your leadoff guy right away. Little bit of versatility on the infield. I know Chris's biggest concern with that was, you know, how often is he going to be in that DH role versus the field? So there's a lot of questions going to, but offseason gets kicked off with that move. We've had a couple other signings like Carlos Estevez, you know, bringing back Michael Lorenzen, and then a few minor league moves like Kevin Biggio, Harold Castro, just some guys that fringe players on other teams that could make an impact here in spring. And then, of course, we've seen a flurry of the non-roster invitees to spring training. So up to this point, there's still some question marks on this team. But up to this point, what grade would you throw out there for this Royals offseason?
I think without another bat, which I'm still fairly confident that some bat is added before spring training begins. I got it about a B right now because I do think they've checked off a lot of boxes. And I do think that the free agent market was a little bit weird this year. I thought it was stale for the majority of the offseason. You had the big names out there. Juan Soto signed relatively early, but then Pete Alonso just signed yesterday. I mean, that was one of the biggest free agents out there. Santander took a while to sign. Alex Bregman's still looking for a 6 to 7 year deal. So with that patience, I think that they nailed the first 4 boxes they needed to check off there. I mean, the Jonathan India deal, that significantly upgrades the top of the order because they didn't have any production really from the leadoff spot last year. It was one of the worst spots in all of baseball for that part in the lineup. And Jonathan India was an above league average bat. His walk rate was top 5 in baseball. The Royals didn't have anybody over an 8% walk rate last year, and that was Bobby Witt Jr. Like we expect Vinny Pasquantino to improve on that this year. Some of these other guys are just never going to be walk guys. So adding somebody like India, I think really helps a guy like Bobby Witt Jr., really helps the top of the order because he can work the count. He can take the walk where you had guys at the top of the order that were known to ambush the first pitch of the game or the second pitch of the game. And that can work when you're hitting well. But there were a lot of times last year where the leadoff spot was not hitting well. And it showed when that offense struggled because you started every game with 1 out. And Bobby Witt Jr. had to come to the plate with nobody on. I even think that Jonathan India has a chance to have a great year because how are pitchers going to approach him? They know Bobby Witt Jr. is behind him. They know that he can walk. So guess what? They're going to give him more hittable pitches. They don't want to just gift him first base when you're dealing with an MVP-like player right behind him. So that's why I'm pretty high on the Jonathan India deal. And then for the other ones, Michael Wacha bringing him back, they were adamant the minute the offseason started, they didn't want him to even go into free agency. Like, they wanted to get that done. Wacha loved Kansas City, was a match made in heaven. And then you go out there and get Michael Lorenzen. They wanted a swing starter. Why not just bring back a guy who was very effective in that role? And then they also wanted bullpen help. They, of course, go get Estevez there for the back end. 4 boxes have been checked off, and I think that's really good. And I like the guys they brought in. But for this offseason to go from a B to maybe an A-, they can't just get a bat. They need to get a bat that moves the needle, and there's just limited options out there at this point.
Yeah, which we're going to get into here in a second. Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, why do you think they weren't more aggressive on the bat? I know that the report with Santander and how close that was, but how they were a little late. There's more reasons. There's other players they could have added, like Max Kepler, someone that would have been interesting, Jesse Winkler. Like, it just felt like they kind of pigeonholed themselves in Santander or bust, and then the Blue Jays gave him more years, and that kind of fell apart. Like, what's kind of your thought process on why they weren't more aggressive?
Yeah, I do think to an extent they were aggressive. I think the Royals have tried multiple outlets in bringing in a bat, and that goes as early as the winter meetings, even a little bit before the winter meetings. But they also didn't want to be reckless. I think last offseason, they needed to basically assemble an entire team, right? They needed to assemble a rotation. They needed to assemble a bullpen. They needed help in the lineup to pair with guys that were on a 106-loss team. So they were kind of allowed to be a little bit reckless, almost, like where they can go out there and, hey, we really want Hunter Renfroe. Even if we got to go a couple $1 million over, we need another bat for the lineup. Hey, we need to go out there and get 4 guys for the bullpen. If they want an extra $1 million or 2, that's all right. This offseason, it was more so of we got priorities and we got spots we need to fill, but we're not going to rush in December. If this guy's asking for, like, if Carlos Estevez in December was asking for a 3-year deal, they're going to go, okay, good luck with that. We'll meet back in January or February when that price is a little bit more reasonable, and maybe we can work something out there, which they did with that player option. But I do think they were aggressive. And with a lot of the guys that we all liked, right, Jurickson Profar, Anthony Santander, there was interest. But I don't think they were willing to go that extra mile because deep down, I think they view like Jack Caglione as their future middle of the order bat. So do you want to invest 5 years into a 30-year-old bat that might be blocking him 2-3 years down the road? Now, I think they'd always be able to make it work for a guy like Caglione. But I think when they looked at Santander or Jurickson Profar, it was, hey, we're all right giving you a lot of money. We're all right giving you 15 to 20 million or 20 to 25 million a year. but we're not giving you 5 years, right? I think even with Profar, the Braves give him 3. I don't think they wanted to go up to 3. I think they were probably around the 1 to 2 range. That just wasn't going to be as enticing to a guy like Jurickson Profar because coming off a career year, he wanted security. Santander, coming off a career year, wanted more security. And I think if it was anybody other than Toronto, I think the Royals would have been able to do it because Toronto swung and missed on everybody in the offseason.
Right.
So when Santander went to them, guess what he has? He's got the upper hand. Hey, you guys haven't been able to land anybody. I'm willing to go there. Give me 5 years. And they said, okay, we have to do it now. Like, we can't miss on Santander with how many guys we've been linked to. And for the Royals to offer 3 years, I would have been totally fine with it. I would have been actually surprised that Santander settled for 3 years, but they've tried the free agent outlet. They've tried the trade market. But as JJ Picollo said last week at Royals Rally, I wasn't there, but I believe this is from Andy Rogers, you can't force teams to trade with you, right? You can really like somebody, and I've got followers and stuff that say, well, why aren't they trading for Taylor Ward? Why aren't they trading for this guy? Because maybe those teams are asking for Carter Jensen. Maybe they're asking for Blake Mitchell. And do you make that trade for a guy that can certainly help you in 2024 or 2025, but are they going to be helping you in 2026 like you expect Carter Jensen to, like you expect Blake Mitchell to, or Jack Caglione? So I think they've been aggressive, but they've been patient as well. I don't think they're trying to be reckless. And even though it's late in the offseason, I don't think they're going to be reckless at this point just because they need a bat. If push comes to shove, it's not going to surprise me if they bring in a Mark Canha type or a Adam Duvall type or even a Yohan Moncada and bank on a bounce back type year.
So let's get into some of these targets then. Now, Chris and I have played this game for months. We have gone up and down every 40-man roster, every deep prospect. We have played every trade scenario we can think of, and there just doesn't feel like there's a lot from the trade perspective that makes sense for both parties without the Royals having to give up too much or hoping that the other team wants our project piece. So from a trade perspective, are there any guys out there you feel like right now that from a trade perspective would be worth pursuing that would actually move the needle? And if so, who might those guys be?
Yeah, it's so tough with the trade market, as you brought up, because who do we really know that's being shopped, right? There was a couple times in the winter meetings where we heard names pop up. I think at one point in time, like the Athletics were interested in maybe moving J.J. Bleday for the right price. I love that idea. But now we've seen the Athletics for the first time in a decade be aggressive in free agency. Yeah. So why trade away one of your starting outfielders when you're trying to really improve this team in their first year in Sacramento? Taylor Ward's the name, as I just brought up. Like, every arrow points back to Taylor Ward because he's been probably the most publicized trade piece out there. There was even a point right before the arbitration deals were all settled where I think it was Mark Feinstein out there reported that, like, Taylor Ward could be traded, right? Or there's a team that's really interested. And I thought that screams Royals because the Royals were interested in him last offseason. I think at the trade deadline too, but the Angels, they're not really budging. And I don't blame them because he is coming off a really good year. He's had 3 or 4 really good years in a row. And if they're going to move him, they need to get a pretty significant return. And I just don't know if they're willing to budge right now. So it's less and less likely as each day passes and the closer we get to spring training, I'd imagine a Taylor Ward deal can get struck unless they ask for players that are not Jack Caglione, which he's untouchable, of course, or Blake Mitchell or Carter Jensen. I would even throw like Ben Kudin and Blake Wolters in there. The Royals really like both of those guys. And if it's any of those 5 names, I don't think they'd want to do the deal. You can get maybe a little bit more precise and look at like Brett Beatty now in New York. The reason I say that is the Royals were interested in like a left-handed hitting third baseman, if you can recall that back in December, I think it was. Josh Rojas's name was brought up as somebody that could be a little bit flexible for the infield. And now with Pete Alonso going back to New York and Mark Vientos going to back to third base, he's moved back to the bench there. So sorry for all my phone blowing up here. Jeez, I don't even know.
We got Royals insider trading going on right now.
No, it's a dumb group message I'm in. So I might have to find a way to do not disturb or mute myself here real quickly. But he's another name. He would still be a bank on the upside. He's never done it at the big league level. But they want maybe a left-handed hitting third baseman Or what if that's Kevin Biggio, right? What if that's the guy they were talking about? If we need a left-handed hitting third baseman who's flexible, that could certainly be a reason there. But now, at least with the Brett Beatty situation, if you are interested in a guy like him, that door could be open again because he's not going to be starting anymore. And Starling Marte might not be starting either because Juan Soto's in right. Jesse Winker's probably the DH. He was somebody apparently the Royals were going after as well.
He's been on their list for a couple of years now.
Yeah.
But he is aging.
The other name that maybe a little bit more of a long shot that I've started to hear a little bit of traction is Cedric, not necessarily to the Royals, but that the Orioles would look to shop Cedric Mullins just because they have all these young guys with Kowser and Kerstead. They just signed Ramon Laureano. They signed Tyler O'Neill. I think Mullins is on his last year of his control ability. So I don't know. I don't know if that's an option at all that we could take serious, but he's someone that I would at least, pick up the phone and see, especially with how he plays center field.
Yeah, I mean, there are options out there when you look at, center field. And I thought, Bader too, before he went to Minnesota, right. It kind of made sense if they were to platoon, but then you look at the numbers, like Bader's just a right-handed hitting Kyle Isbell. So does it make sense to give him $6 million to just be what Kyle Isbell is? And honestly, the platoon splits, with Bader weren't very good either. So that type of move wouldn't make too much sense. But with the names that, we've brought up, that you guys have brought up, I do wonder if it just comes down to, at this point, are you looking more so at the bat compared to what position they play, right? Because we've always talked about corner outfield bat, corner outfield bat, corner outfield bat. Well, you look in free agency, that's Mark Canha, that's maybe Kevin Pillar, and he's really a center fielder, but now at his age might be a corner outfielder. Yoan Moncada is a third baseman. So that's kind of my point of, at this point now, where everything has kind of been wrapped up in free agency, do the Royals go, look, it doesn't matter where you play. We just need a slight upgrade wherever we can get it. And for the right price, I think they can get that done. Adam Duvall's another name, a corner outfield guy who can play defense a little bit better than you'd expect him to at age 36, 37. Certainly better than Mark Canha. But, that's the interesting part about this offseason is you get to one point where you go, I don't want to be reckless and give in to a trade where I'm losing a top 5 prospect. I don't want to give in. Like even the Tommy Pham deal. Like Tommy Pham getting $4 million from Pittsburgh. I don't know if that shocked you guys. That shocked me. And I love Tommy Pham, what he did for the Royals. At this point, I was thinking maybe he gets like a $1 million deal somewhere. I think Pittsburgh expects to start him somewhere in the outfield.
I would agree.
So that's
some of their moves have suggested that they're pushing the pieces to the middle, I guess, if you want to call it that.
Exactly. And that's a perfect example, in my opinion, of like a team that got late in the game and went, all right, we need to get somebody. We're willing to go the extra mile. With the Royals, I don't know if I see that desperation, to be honest with you. And I'm still not sold. That opening day outfield is going to be Melendez, Isbell, and Renfroe. I still am holding out hope that some move is made to counteract that, because it was, next to the Rockies, the worst outfield in all of baseball offensively last year. So, yeah, I think it gets to that point where, are you willing to be desperate? Are you willing to go the extra mile? Or is that player going to cave? Right? I think we saw it with Alonso last night too. Like, I think Alonso went into free agency wanting a 5 to 6 year deal. And then you get late in the game and they go, you see what happened with Jordan Montgomery, even though he's a pitcher? See what happened with Snell before he, of course, threw a no-hitter and was able to dominate the rest of the way. But those guys didn't get a full spring training. And then they struggled to begin the year, and then it hurt their value. So you get those players in free agency that go, maybe I need a 1 year deal. Maybe I was hoping for a 3 year deal. Now I got to settle because I'm desperate to get to a ballpark. So it's kind of a standoff, if you will, to answer your question, that with free agency, sometimes trades as well, somebody's going to cave in, whether it be the Royals or the player or the other team they're negotiating with. Somebody will be desperate enough to finally go, all right, I hear what you're saying. I'm willing to do that deal.
Yeah. So my take, I think the outfield conversation to me at this point has been the options that are there really aren't that much of a needle mover. That it seems like, maybe from JJ's perspective, hey, we'll roll the dice with the guys we have and hope that one of these 3 outfield guys we have in our rotation / minor league takes a step up this year, whether it's Drew Waters, MJ with his new batting stance improves, or Nelson Velasquez. Like, again, Chris and I, we've gone through this so many times, and every guy I throw his way, he's like, is that really that much different than a Nelson Velasquez having an uptick? So from an outfield perspective, do you think that's the most realistic path moving forward, that they are hoping one of those guys / the combination of Michael Massey, India, and left field is the answer to the outfield production issues?
Yeah, and that's another thing that we don't really talk about, because there's a world in which on March 27th, I think it is his opening day against Cleveland, like Michael Massey's in left field, right? We've been talking about Melendez, Isbell, and Renfroe. There's a world in which Massey's starting in left and India's at second base, and one of those guys is not starting. I do think that India and Massey are going to have to be flexible, and I think you might have to go through some growing pains in the outfield. But Keegan, I think you're right that there is a part of this that they're just banking on upside again. And it's not the worst thing in the world. I know to a lot of fans and people listening to this, they're going to be pissed off because we've done that now with Melendez for 2 years of, hey, give him the at-bats, let him work through it, he's going to be fine. And I know the new stance, maybe it's optimistic for a lot of you, maybe it's not. But I kind of view Melendez in the same way I do Ryan O'Hearn, where it got to the point with Ryan O'Hearn where you said, look, we've done all we could do for you. It's not going to work out. But in a world where like Melendez goes elsewhere, it would not shock me in the slightest if he turned into what Ryan O'Hearn's doing in Baltimore. Yeah. So for the Royals learning from that and going, it was a slight change here. It was altering the stance here. And then he became a very valuable middle of the order bat for Baltimore, because that would be the best case scenario. Not spending or trading away pieces for a middle of the order bat. And then Melendez runs into 20 home runs, hits 260, and you feel really good about the optics of what he could be, because he's also not making much money right now. So that is a part of what they're trying to do. But I also get this sense that they want to have a cushion. Whereas if Melendez starts the year like he did last year, hitting $160, $150, you got to be able to pivot somewhere. And that pivot cannot be, well, let's try Velasquez. Velasquez has never done it at the big league level for an extended period of time. That's not Drew Waters. That's not Nick Prado. You need to have some insurance where, hey, maybe you're not even overexposing Melendez like to begin the year. Like, is it crazy to think they could platoon Renfroe and Melendez? Like, why not? If they go out there and get a true starting left fielder, or maybe they go out there and get a third baseman like a Moncada, Massey goes to left field, Isbell's in center. Why not platoon Melendez and Renfroe in right field, where Renfroe just gets to hit against lefties? And honestly, too, with Renfroe, if he didn't get hurt last year for the second time, I think it was, we're talking about him completely differently. Right. Because for like 220-plus plate appearances, he was one of the best hitters in the lineup. Right. But then he was really bad after he came back from the injury. So I do think it's one of those scenarios where you are banking on upside, but I think there's a way to make it a little less risky instead of just going, Renfroe's the starting right fielder, Melendez is the starting left fielder. Let's see if it works this go around. Because if it doesn't, guess what everybody's going to point back to if that offense is not playing well and the Royals are not playing well? It's that you didn't make that key move for the middle of the order.
Right. And so let's just switch off the offense a little bit and say they don't make a move. Say this is the team that they have. I don't think spring training's that exciting. You're basically talking about, can Nick Lofton hold off Biggio and Castro for the utility spot? The pitching is completely different. There are a lot of guys that I think the Royals trust and expect to get production from this year. I just kind of, what's your initial take on the pitchers, and who do you expect to break camp with?
Yeah, I think the starting five for the rotation I got right now is Reagans, Lugo, Waka, Lorenzen, and Bubic. I think Bubic is going to battle it out with Alec Marsh. There are some people, and I'm speaking more so followers out there, social media, that want Kyle Wright to win the job. I don't think they're going to rush him. I don't think there's a world, even if he pitches well in spring training, that they go, he's our starter. I think the acknowledgement of the front office saying we want Bubic to be a starter is truthful. That's not a smokescreen. Like, he was so damn good in the 8th inning, and they still went, I think his upside's more so in the rotation. So that's why I'm going, if you're willing to make that move, you probably want him to win the job, which then makes it interesting with Alec Marsh, because where does he fit in the bullpen? You have your long reliever with Daniel Lynch. You've got your one-inning guys in Sam Long, Angel Serpa, and John Schreiber, and Hunter Harvey. You've got your back-end guys in Estevez and Lucas Ursig. And, oh, by the way, Carlos Hernandez is out of options. So you're either having to move Carlos Hernandez to make room for Marsh, Or you go into camp and say, okay, if Alec Marsh loses out in the job, we still want you to be a starter. So let's keep you stretched out in Omaha, like they were doing once they got Lorenzen last year. They sent Marsh to AAA. He dominated. I don't think that'd be the worst thing in the world. It would suck for Alec Marsh because he wants to win that job, but there's not a world in which Bubic loses the job in camp and they go, all right, you go to AAA. No, they'll just move Bubic to the back end of the bullpen again, and he can be that weapon. So I think that's the 5 I have in the rotation. I think Daniel Lynch, as long as he stays healthy, they're going to hope that he continues what he did in September. Unless they trade him, I think Carlos Hernandez makes the team. That stuff played really well in September. And you don't want to get rid of a triple-digit fastball. You never do. And I think his command got a little bit better. I'm pretty high on Steven Cruz. Don't be surprised if he has a really strong camp. Noah Cameron, somebody I think they are really high on.
Yes.
And it wouldn't surprise me if he gets up as early as April or May in some type of role. But the good news is there's a lot of options now.
Yeah.
Where last year you're going, okay, the 5th spot is either Jordan Lyles or Alec Marsh. Like, you don't have that. There's a world in which this rotation, upside-wise, is better than last year. Expect regression. I don't think Lugo is a 200-inning guy with a 3.00 ERA. I also don't think he's going to bottom out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Michael Wacha's gotten better with age. Reagan's is a frontline starter. Lorenzen's been very consistent. And Bubic, I think, has the upside, maybe not innings-wise, to be better than what Brady Singer was. I think Brady Singer is, a guy that you're trying to replace the innings, which is why you brought back Michael Lorenzen to help that a little bit and to have a swing starter like Daniel Lynch or Alec Marsh to help that. But I like where the rotation is right now. I really, really like where the bullpen's at. And who knows, maybe somebody really does surprise us in camp and rip a job from somebody in that bullpen.
Yeah, it does feel like this is going into this spring. You have the most to play with and on that side of the diamond right now, which is a great problem to have, having almost too many options. Because again, last year you had to bank on Schreiber hitting almost immediately. You had to bank on Stratton being a lockdown guy almost immediately. Most of that didn't happen. Guys shuffled around throughout the year, and the bullpen had its ups and it had its downs. But this year you do feel like, health aside, if guys are really doing what they were brought in to do, you've got a lot of options to go with, and you can throw out different looks. And we know Q's a big analytical guy, and it's not the traditional 7, 8, 9 all the time. They like to go with matchups. So it just feels good that you have a little bit more strength on that side to really play with, and that if you do need to make a move, you're not going, well, shoot, we already traded Singer away. Now we got to trade Marsh or Bubic away. What are we going to do? You've got some options there.
You certainly do. That's the best part about it. And, there are people that are concerned about regression. What if Reagan takes a step back? What if Wacha does? What if Lugo does? It's why they've tried to shore up the bullpen a little bit. And they're looking at some of these guys that were great last year to improve off of what they did. Serpa being one of them. Sam Long being one of them. Carlos Hernandez being one of them. And I looked at somebody like Cleveland. Like, Cleveland had a rotation that couldn't barely make it through the entire year, even half the year. I mean, they had guys that they were just trying to throw there, but their bullpen was so good that it masked a lot of those issues. And so for the Royals, if you're fearful of regression, what's the best way to counteract that? It's by having a really good bullpen because, hey, there's going to be a night where Lugo goes 4. There's going to be a night where Reagan's goes 5. But now you can turn to guys where you go, okay, I feel comfortable about who's going out there. Where you remember from April to July, it's like, okay, yeah, you got some guys at the back end of the bullpen that are pitching well. Really, until Lucas Ursa got there, you were just hoping somebody was on that night. But even if you had somebody that was on, a John Schreiber, okay, let's hope MacArthur's on. And that was shaky for a while. And then when you got Lucas Ursig, it was like, okay, he's the fireman. You use him in the 6th, you use him in the 7th. How are you piecing together the 8th and the 9th? That was a big problem. Whereas now I feel really good about where they're at. The fact you could use Ursig in the 7th in a bases-loaded 2-out situation, maybe use him for the 8th, guess what? You got Carlos Estevez for the 9th. Or vice versa. You use Estevez in that spot. Great. We got Lucas Ursig. Okay, you use both of those guys in the 7th and the 8th. What if Hunter Harvey bounces back? What if he looks like he did in 23 and 24, or first half of 24? That's a really good 3 guys for the back end of your bullpen, and that makes me feel better when kind of contemplating the regression of the rotation. If Serpa continues to improve, Hernandez, Daniel Lynch looks good, I really like the upside of what this bullpen can look like.
Yeah,
Yep.
it definitely is again, James Scarther barely mentioned, and he was closing games for 3 months for this team last year. So
the general.
Right. I think we're going to end with the division conversation. But before we get there, and again, thank you for your time, Jack.
Of course.
Who are some guys that maybe fans aren't currently talking about that you think mid-March, when it's time to get ready for a season, that you're going to hear a lot?
Yeah. I am starting to come around a little bit on the farm system again. That was something for a while. I just went, I'm getting too high on some prospects, and then they don't really turn into big leaguers or guys that can stay up there. Nick Prado was somebody I was high on, and it hasn't worked out. And I think the Royals kind of showed last year, even with the injury to Vinny, they'd rather bring in 40-year-old Yuli Gurriel than roll the dice with Nick Prado. They even had Nick Lofton at first base a little bit before that. So I do expect somebody like Nick Lofton. I had a great time talking with him last spring training. He wants to play wherever they put him. And we kind of lose sight of the fact that he was a first rounder. Like, there is upside there. And I think he's got the inside track to take that Garrett Hampson role or that Adam Frazier role. And I think he can do it. I think last year we saw glimpses and flashes where they even trusted him as a leadoff hitter for a little bit because that walk rate was good. But then he went through an awful stretch in the second half where it kind of buried him. I expect him to have a good camp. Noah Cameron, I really think he's going to be one of those talking points. And hopefully the Royals get to a spot where they go, man, how can we get this guy on the roster? Like, I love it when guys force the hand of the front office of, we don't want to keep him in AAA. He can help us now. Evan Sisk, think of him like a Tim Hill type, where I do hope at some point in the middle part of the season he can be in that bullpen, because I think he provides such a unique angle. He's just got to throw strikes. If he can get his command down, that is a really difficult angle to deal with for left-handed hitters. And if somebody like Sam Long regresses or Serpa regresses, or Daniel Lynch for that matter, he's somebody I could see in the bullpen and helping out this team and maybe a division run or a postseason run again. And then on the offensive side of things, I know I brought up Nick Lofton. It's tough because, Jack Caglianone's going to be a focal point there, even with a strong camp. I'm sorry to everybody out there. He's not breaking
He's not
camp.
coming yet.
They need him to get a little bit more polished up, and I think he does get there, but rushing him's the last thing you want to do when you have Vinny Pasquantino over at first base. But I do think some of those guys like a Carter Jensen are going to surprise some people. I think he's closer than people may really think that he is, because that approach is so solid and so polished. I still think early 2026 is when he's probably slated for. But, last year he didn't really get too many opportunities to showcase his skills. And I think this go around, he's going to have that opportunity to go out there and really shine. But no, maybe a Nelson Velasquez catches fire. He definitely needs it. I don't expect him to win a job, but those are always those guys, right? You expect to do well in camp. Nick Prado last year hit like 450 in spring training, and we're all going, man, maybe he does make the team. And then it was Velasquez, and the only time Prado appeared in Kansas City was on the mound in a blowout game. So that's where, as you guys know better than anybody, you can't fall for good spring training numbers, because it's usually the guys that don't make the team play the best. You'll have Bobby Witt Jr. hitting like 212 in spring training, and people go like, oh no, what happened? It's because these guys are just getting work in. And so Melendez too, we talked about Melendez with the new stance. I expect him to have a really good spring, because he usually does. He reminds me a lot of when Moustakas would go to Arizona and just crush the ball, absolutely crush the ball. So those are some names right now that I do think are going to surprise some people. Dark horse candidates, I'm sticking with like a Noah Cameron, a Steven Cruz, or an Evan Sisk.
Yep. Nice. All right, last thing for you here. Give me the 2 or 3 things that need to happen for the Royals to end the year as the AL Central Division champs.
Well, as things stand right now, I think the Central is more winnable than it was last year, because you look to 2024, Minnesota was the favorite. And I think for a lot of people, Minnesota was just going to be able to run away with that division. It was a battle for a wild card spot. Minnesota hasn't done anything this offseason. And even though Pacoda has them winning the division, that's if they're healthy, which they've shown to never be healthy. So Minnesota is a team that also bottomed out last year. Cleveland has only subtracted after winning the division. So that's another one where you go, is that, something you can do again, where your rotation, it barely logs any innings and you're counting on the bullpen to carry you? Maybe they do, maybe they don't. Cleveland always finds a way to figure it out. The White Sox will not be 121 loss bad. I bet they're closer to about 100 to 106 losses. But I think that probably helps you out a little bit because the Royals did go 12-1 against Chicago. But I think it helps you out if they're more competitive because it can knock down some of those other teams in the division. The one I go back to over and over again is Detroit, because Detroit now has a good 1-2 punch with fantastic 1-2 punch with Skubal and Flaherty. It really comes down to Bregman for me. If they get Bregman, now I would probably put Detroit as the front runner for the division. And that's still without knowing if the Royals will bring another bat as well. But Detroit and Kansas City they're neck and neck to me. They are almost identical in a lot of ways where they rely on their rotation. The Royals are now going to rely on their bullpen a little bit more, where Detroit really relied on their bullpen. It was kind of flip-flop last year, where Detroit counted on their bullpen and Tarek Skubal. Everybody else, it was, let's see what happens. The Royals we're counting on that rotation. We'll figure it out with the bullpen. But then offensively, like, the Tigers can be good. There's also a lot of holes. There's also a lot of weak points at lineup. Same thing with the Royals. So if the Tigers don't land Bregman and he goes back to Houston or he goes to the Cubs, I think the Royals would be considered one of those favorites if they can keep that rotation kind of similar to where they were last year. If the rotation bottoms out, then no, I don't think they can win the division, because I believe with a good bullpen, a good rotation, look, that offense is going to be fine. If they're the 10th to 12th best offense in baseball with a really good rotation and a solid bullpen, they can win this division anywhere from 86 to 90 games, So I think they've got the upside. They got that expectation, and now it does become that question: how do you play when there's expectation? It was all fun and sunshine and rainbows last year when you were overcoming a 106-loss season. And now people won't allow you to start slow. Now people will be criticizing you if you're 500 in May. You have to have that hot start, because that April schedule, I don't know if you had a chance to look at it yet, that is brutal. It is a brutal April schedule again. And, the Royals offense, if they're slow to get going, they're going to be relying on that rotation and bullpen a lot early on. But it's a winnable division. I'll tell you, it's more winnable than it was last year. I think the Royals will either finish first or second this year, and I think a lot of it comes down to what Detroit does the rest of the way.
Yep. A lot of expectations this year. It's going to be a fun spring. Looking forward to the optimism that'll come out of spring training this year, and just can't wait to see the group the guys put out there. But Jack, always appreciate you coming on and giving us your insight as in my opinion, the best Royals only podcast around right now. So obviously, if you guys have not checked them out, you're missing a lot. You should go do so. But yeah, Jack, always appreciate you coming on, and of course, we'll love to do some more of this throughout the season.
Hey, anytime, fellas. Always have a blast.
And for those of you watching, again, hit that like and subscribe button below. Go check us out on any of our social medias at KCSA Pod, and we'll catch you guys in the next episode.